Welcome to Photoactive, a podcast about photography and technology. I'm Kirk McElhearn.
And I'm Jeff Carlson.
You can find show notes, including any photos we discuss in this episode, at photoactive.co. That's photoactive.co. This week, we're very happy to welcome back one of the earliest guests on our podcast, Quintin Lake. Quintin walked the entire coast of Britain, just the Big Island, not the rest of it. The journey started on April 17, 2015, and finished on September 15 of this year. 5.5 years. Quintin, thanks for joining us again.
It's great to be back.
I'm just in awe of what you did. And after, when I discovered your work a few years ago and we started the podcast, and I've been following you and we interviewed you, and it's just, I've been living vicariously a bit through the photos that you've been posting on Twitter and Instagram, and seeing the wonderful landscapes and feeling empathy when you're getting frostbite or your socks are too wet or it's too windy and you had some really bad weather. So you've been home now for what, 2 months, 2.5 months?
2.5 months. Yeah.
Obviously, this is a situation where, well, I guess you could go out, right? You're alone. You're not meeting 6 people outside, so you're allowed to. But how has the change been? How have you transitioned from that movement? And we have to say it wasn't every day. You did it in little bits of a few weeks at a time. But how have you transitioned from that movement to this sort of sedentary lifestyle?
Well, it's been difficult. I mean, it's the lack of movement, but also the lack of mission. That I had this thing for 5 years where even if I wasn't walking, I was planning the next section. So I kind of missed that, but I have, I do integrate walking into my life. So tomorrow, every Wednesday, I go on a kind of long adventure walk from dawn to dusk. I'm not sleeping in a tent. And then a couple of other times a week, I walk up my local hill to watch the sunset, and I take my stove up and just make a tea just because it's a nice thing to do to stay in with it. So I am making sure I'm out a lot because I know for my kind of mental health, I need to do that. But the transitions, it's been really very strange because I had a lot of interviews, I think 80 or something. So I'm only just coming out at the end of that. So it's been a really surreal, strange phase of my life. And at the moment, I'm just doing a lot. Today I was selling prints. Every day I'm selling prints. So it's kind of business, talking to people. So I haven't really taken stock yet, but I suspect it's going to suddenly hit me that I'm not doing it anymore.
We'll link in the show notes to a couple of the videos. There's one that I guess you made for Canon. That's a really good overview of what you were doing. And there was one on the BBC where they were waiting for you at St. Paul's Cathedral. Your family was waiting when you ended.
That's right. Yeah.
And you were shooting these videos as you were going on. You didn't have a camera crew behind you. You did have a drone flying over you at times, and that was interesting.
Yes. I took everything myself. I think of the 5-year journey, I think it was the iPhone 8 where I felt the video was good enough that it was kind of worth putting some energy into making the video good. And so I think that was a couple of years ago. So I think it was from North Scotland. I took a lot of videos with that and time lapses. And then about the same time, I took a Mavic Air as well. So it was all footage. It was because as I got fitter, I could take more weight. At the beginning of the journey, I was trying to cut down weight as much as possible. And as I went on, I went for more robust gear. And actually, a lot of my equipment got bigger. So the tripod got bigger and I carried a drone and more batteries. So I ended up carrying more weight. But I really wanted to get that video material. But it actually helped in getting the media interested because I could just give them a Google Drive with all the material on it and they didn't have to do anything really.
Yeah, and that makes it easier for some producer at a TV station to whip up a thing. 2 minutes 30, he's got all the video. They have an intro and an outro.
Yeah, it's definitely why Canon. They were quite blunt about it. They could afford to send a crew out for 2 days, but not for a week. And to get all that material that I provided them, it would have taken a lot longer.
So have you edited that stuff yourself, or do you just have a lot of raw video that still needs to be worked on?
Just a lot of raw video. Yeah, I mean, as I went, if I had data, I would post it on Twitter and Facebook as a kind of a bit of background summary. But I've just put it unedited on a Google Drive and other people have edited it when it's been on TV. Yeah.
You said you don't have a sense of mission, but you have thousands of photos to edit. How many? Do you have an idea of how many keepers you have and how long it's going to take to go through all of them? And will you ever go through all of them?
It is my intention. I mean, it has So the journey was, I need to look at my notes, I can't remember now. The journey was 454 days of walking, and I've got 186 days of backlog. So, but it has been, I'm actually really enjoying it at the moment. I'm editing Neudart, which is my favorite bit of the journey. So I'm suspecting those 186 days will take me about a year. So I'm probably going to try and give myself a really positive deadline at some point of next winter. But my intention is to work through it or update the blog, because I'm making the prints and ultimately it will be in a book. So, but of the keepers, how many will be? I mean, I think I've got about 1,600 keepers at the moment, so it'll probably be about double that.
That's extraordinary. It's almost too many. How can you choose after a while? I know that for you, you're going through them and you've got a linear progression as you're looking at each batch of photos. You know where you were, you can follow your path. But after a while, isn't it hard to say, you're comparing these photos to the previous ones and this one's good, but is this one better? Or are you just looking at each segment and saying what's the best in that segment?
Well, I'm trying to treat it like, I mean, the trick to doing the endurance walk was to only ever think about the next horizon and the next few. If you started to think about the next week or month, or the fact that, I split a tendon and had all kinds of things wrong with me, and if you dwell on the negatives, you're never going to progress. You have to just think about getting to the next. I mean, every evening I felt too tired and thought I can continue. But after a while, I realized that's how it would always be. And I kind of think with the editing, it's the same. So, I'm looking at the thumbnails of the day ahead of me and trying to enjoy the joy of editing it. And I'm not really thinking about the bigger picture. And then afterwards, I'm making these comparisons. But when I am making the comparisons, I'm finding it really very enjoyable creatively. So like the sort of thematic sub-albums that are emerging, kind of like abstract seascapes or industrial geometrical details, things like that, which they're forming into little kind of albums. And when they're together, they become little gem-like groupings, and then it's actually easier to choose the best one or to make a set within those. So, I mean, I'm thoroughly enjoying that process. Yeah.
Are you finding that the photos that you expected would be keepers are the ones that you are choosing, or has there been a significant amount of just discovery of running across something and say, wow, I thought this was just going to be a sort of an average shot, and it turns out to be one of my favorites from the days?
I think it's often like that, especially how malleable raw files are, that I can see the preview and think that's not so great. Mm-hmm. And then when you kind of start manipulating a bit and draw out some of the shadows and the details, you can have a picture that you weren't expecting, can be amazing. I mean, often, having said that, when you get the tingle up your spine when you're on location, like I recently edited this rainbow storm in Neudart where it looks like there's about 4 seasons at once in the same frame, a wide angle shot. I mean, that was a euphoric moment to be standing there as the weather changed so quickly. It was suddenly a storm, then it was sun, then it was wind, and it was thrilling to be there. And I think some of that has translated into the picture, but often it's not like that. Sometimes it can feel thrilling and it's not there in the picture. So I think it works both ways. Mm.
It's interesting because lately on Twitter and Instagram, you've been sharing a number of photos with stormy skies. Yes. And I like photos with stormy skies. I like that randomness of the clouds in nature that has those gradations and all. Of course, they're better in black and white, but yes, there's something energetic about this, and knowing what you've been through in the rough weather, that really says a lot. That those photos with the ominous clouds kind of stand out. I can imagine you've got 5 miles more to go before the evening and you see those clouds and you must feel somewhat anxious about getting to your end point.
Very much, especially the ones you just talked about in Neudart, because it was so remote. It was kind of 4 or 5 days to walk in to there, and there was no one around at all. And I was, really had to be very self-contained for quite a long period of time. And it was in the winter. It was getting dark there about 4 o'clock. And then you see the storm cloud. And then because the terrain is tricky, there was nowhere to put a tent. So I would have to progress for sometimes 3 or 4 hours in the dark in that quite mountainous terrain. So it did feel very ominous. But the upside is I was seeing otters and porpoise, and I mean, it's just
porpoise.
Sorry. Well, I can't remember what they're called now.
Porpoises?
They're porpoises, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I thought maybe this was another British pronunciation I had never heard.
No.
Like,
no, it's just me being stupid.
Every once in a while, I discover these words, and the typical one for me is the one that's pronounced Chumley, but that's spelled with like 18 letters.
Oh yes,
CHOLMONDLEY, Chumley. And heck, I live right next door to Worcestershire, which is pronounced Worcestershire. But yeah, I'm always curious when people come up with English words, because I've only been in this country not even 8 years, so there's a lot to discover. Speaking of discovery, what I find interesting is most of your photos are landscapes, but there are a fair number of photos of the people that you met along the way. How did people react when you were telling them, "Yeah, I'm walking 10,000 kilometers"?
Most of the time, I didn't really say. I mean, the reason there aren't many pictures of people is I didn't meet many people, and
yeah, but there are a fair number. I'm looking on your galleries here, and there's people here and there.
Oh no, I've made a conscious effort to photograph people, but my sort of policy. There's Neil McDermott, who's like an incredible photographer of people. He's done a lot of projects on the coast. So I felt. My strength was sort of the industrial landscape thing. So it's partly about trying to keep the theme of my work specific. But my own strategy was that if I felt a real connection with someone after talking to them, I would then ask to take their picture. I'm not the kind of photographer that I just kind of go out, and especially not in this environment. I have done that in big cities, but when it's so remote, you can't kind of come across someone without them realizing it. So I generally we'd have a chat, and if there was a connection, I'd take a picture, and I think the best portraits I take is where that connection comes across.
And how many? I mean, you spent some of the nights you spent in bed and breakfast. You didn't tell people what your project was. You just said, "I'm just doing a walk."
Most of the time, yeah.
Because you didn't want to get into long conversations about it.
No, because I didn't want to jinx it that I would fail. I mean, a project like this, I think you've got to. I mean, lots of things did go wrong. I mean, I had shin splints. I had a torn tendon. I got stuck below cliffs with a rising tide over my boots in Holderness, which is the closest, genuinely life-threatening moment where I was really lucky to scramble up the cliffs and get out. That was really kind of quite near the end. And the Broomway was about 3 days before the end, which is supposedly Britain's most perilous path, this very long tidal route out to sea, which needed a massive amount of really technical planning, talking to meteorologists to make sure that
is
it
that
was
the
safe.
one where you can only walk at certain hours of the day because the tide rises?
That's right. Well, it's 9 kilometers. It's about 1 kilometer away from shore. It's extremely fast rising tide. If you get lost one direction, it's sinking mud, and on the other direction, it's unexploded ordnance. So if you get even like 50 meters wrong, you're going to get stuck. And then the wind and the meteorological pressure affects the tide, and it can make it even 1 or 2 meters extra high.
Wow!
And if you judge it even slightly wrong, you're completely screwed. So, and you have to walk. It's a really weird experience. You have to walk with the tide dropping. So you have to wade through it just enough so that you can see the ground. It's kind of terrifying. Well, it is terrifying.
I remember seeing the photos that you posted that looked like there was one period when you showed a photo in front of you and behind you, and you couldn't see the beach or anything. It's just water.
It's just water, yeah.
But I didn't have the understanding of how precarious it really was.
Yeah, it's a strange. I mean, supposedly it's over 100 people have perished on it, and it's really weird. But it's a Foulness Island that this leads to is a island used by the Ministry of Defence they've used it for different experimental and testing. So there's a whole lot of mystique. And then when I arrived on the island, and you can only arrive without getting intercepted by the Broomway and back by the Broomway, which logistically with the tides and the daylight basically means it's almost impossible. And I arrived and all the adrenaline, and I was really wet, and I dumped my stuff on the beach, put my stove on, made a cup of tea, and was just so relieved that I'd got there. And then this Jeep, and I was intercepted immediately with these, the British way of going, "Hello, sir, can I help you?" Which means that's the British way of saying, get. But they just wanted to know exactly what I was doing, how I was getting back, but I felt I was being watched the whole time around when I was there. So it's a really strange place.
It sounds like the X-Files.
It is really like the X-Files. No, it's really, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and there's a pub and there's a church in the middle of the of the island, which is completely derelict, and most of the buildings are derelict. It's a very strange place. And then these sort of buzzing buildings in the middle of it with guarded buildings.
There's a place off the coast of Brittany that goes to, it's a road that goes to one of the islands. I think it's the Ile de Ré, and the tide covers the road twice a day.
Yeah.
And so if you go there, it's not quite as long, but if you go there, you have to make sure that you can get there safely. Yeah. And a few years ago, they did the Tour de France. They started in that area, and the riders were a little bit late, and you see them going along the road with the water coming up to their feet, and they really had to hurry. That sort of thing is dangerous.
It is dangerous. Well, and we've got Lindisfarne, Holy Island, here as well, which I walked over there under moonlight at night. There's a pilgrim's path. It's probably similar. It's like, I think it's 3 kilometers on the pilgrim's route, and there's a causeway you can drive across. And people there told me, the tourists visiting often get stuck because they go to see if that's where the Vikings landed and that whole amazing history there. And there's the castle, and people go and visit, and then they get stuck, and they try and push the tide getting back and get stuck. there's lots of pictures on the internet of coaches and cars.
That's
stuck
scary. Yeah,
and it is scary. Yeah,
that brings up the question of, how much of your trip was that sort of technical planning, scouting ahead on maps and all of that, versus just, I'm going to go walk. I mean, obviously you had a destination, but I think maybe I have it in my mind. It was just, I know where I'm going to go, and I'm going to grab my camera and my gear, and I'm just going to head out and see what I find.
With the difficult bits were each planned like an expedition, and masses of planning. So Ardnamurchan Peninsula, Neudaat, the Broomway, those. I mean, the Broomway was really hours and hours of research, talking to different people over a number of months to figure out how to do it. And the other wilderness areas were planned really carefully. But the other bits I was improvising as I went. I mean, if like the South Coast, there weren't any big logistical problems. It was just about getting food and water, for example.
I'm looking at one photo, which I think you tweeted this a few weeks ago, and I like minimalist photography, and this is one of the nicest ones. White Horizon, Irish Sea, Dumfries and Galloway, Scotland. So you've got the gray clouds, you've got the light, the sunlight, just on the horizon of the sea, and then the sea itself is very dark. You have a number of photos like that, kind of like, what's his name, Hiroshi Sugimoto, that did these photos of sky and sea. And what I find so interesting is that in Sugimoto's photos, they all look the same. I bought one of his books, and after about 12 pages, you're looking at the same photo, just slightly different. But here, your photos, everyone is different. You've managed to find different light in the sea, slightly different colors. That, to me, would be a wonderful series to make a book of.
I completely agree. And for me, he was like a sort of towering coastal touchstone. And at the beginning, I was keeping my coastal pictures to myself because I thought, well, I don't want to do a bad version of his work. But then I think because the weather was so inclement and there was so much strange variety and some of the pictures you're talking about, some of my favorite pictures, yes, I think it would, when all this gets distilled, those pictures will be a really large part of what I think is important about this project. I mean, there's another one called Banded Horizon, which is like there's about 5 layers of cloud bands looking from Devon to Wales, which has a similar, really, to me, unique aesthetic I haven't seen before, of these really interesting tones.
Yes, this is the one with be honest, it looks like you photoshopped layers of clouds. I know that's not what it is, but it looks like you photoshopped the different layers of clouds there. And there's 3 or 4 bands of clouds, and then you get a couple of bands in the water. That's really fascinating.
It almost could be like a bad clone job, couldn't it?
Yeah.
Be like using the patch tool badly, but it's actually how it was.
So in all of this, Britain has an extraordinary coastal landscape. Is there an area that was the most interesting? I mean, the proverbial white cliffs of Dover, or the rough Scottish terrain, the sandy beaches with the statues off Liverpool. What was the area that you'll remember the most?
Well, the part which I remember the most is the rough bounds of Scotland, which is the area of the Ardnamurchan Peninsula, Arisaig Peninsula, Moydart and Neudaat is what denotes the rough bounds, and that's the kind of western bit around Mallaig, and it's not only mountainous, but within the mountains it's very sort of ridged landscape, so it's pretty much impossible to build roads through. So as a result, it's very, very pristine, and all the people I met in were these really kind of charismatic, interesting people that were holding out in that environment. So it's just for the people and the landscape. And because it was such an adventure to plan it and figure it out, each of those parts was kind of carrying food for a week at a time. And like Naidot has got one little village, you can only get to it by boat. So it really felt kind of epic and really amazing adventure. And if people want to get a taste of that environment, you could the Cape Wrath Trail, which is a brilliant, quite well organized adventure trail. And there's a bothy called Sowley's Bothy where I met two guys really unexpectedly in the middle of winter in this, and that's on the edge of Naidot, where it's a bit easier to get to than the rest of it.
And so you were in this area in winter, which isn't really the best time to be in Scotland, is it?
Well, theoretically not, but
is there a good time to be in Scotland?
Well, I mean, some of the pictures I'm proudest of with these storms and rainbows and everything going on at once, I mean, that only really happens quite like that with that degree of drama in the winter.
Yeah.
So and then you don't have midges, but of course it's much colder and much windier, and you've hardly got any light. But part of why I was very disciplined in going through the 4 seasons throughout the 5 years, and that was because I wanted to have this variety of light and tone that you only get in the winter. Some section hikers, which I guess is what I am, would sort of only do 3 seasons and leave out the winter. But I found I was often getting the very best pictures in the winter. And there's a real sense of focus that you get up before dawn, you walk all day, and then you start to relax at sunset. So there's no like sleeping in and taking it easy, but actually in the winter you feel you've really grasped the day with both hands. It's quite a nice feeling to have covered the distance in the winter.
So I'm looking at the map and I'm looking at the different times of year. For instance, Argyllshire, I'm probably not pronouncing that right. Argyllshire South, you're in August. And then December, you're Inverness South, which isn't far away. But what happens up here is you were really following the very coast. So every time there's one of those little, I guess, mini fjords, you have to go all the way in and all the way out. And so right. you could have gone 20 miles as the crow flies, but it took 100 miles. Was that it?
That's it. And also all of that there's no footpaths for any of that. So the terrain it's kind of tussocky heather and bogs and rocks and I could be going with full energy all day from dawn to dusk and only cover sometimes only in Naidot only 9 kilometers, which was really kind of soul destroying. I mean, when I'm on the flat, even carrying 20 kilograms, I can cover 45 kilometers if I need to, if I need to get somewhere. If I'm doing a long day, I mean, my average was 25 kilometers. So it just to give an impression of how difficult the terrain was.
So I'm looking at the map and you're on the east there, just north of Norwich, and you have the COVID-19 pandemic lockdown where you returned home for 17 weeks. And so it was from March until July, but then you did that last bit from July to September I guess it wasn't all straight because there's a lot of inlets there too when you get down to Essex.
I mean, Essex has got the second longest county coastline in England. So it's really surprising. So it's 576 kilometers. So it's got a huge amount of inlets, even though it's really close. But I mean, Norfolk and Suffolk were pretty quick.
Yeah, Lincolnshire you did in 9 days, and that looks in straight line. That looks as long as Suffolk, Essex, London, almost entirely.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. But I did it continuously because I was worried about a second lockdown, and in fact.
So that made you rush a little bit more?
Well, I walked, I mean, I think the longest leg of the journey was in Scotland. I walked 9 weeks at a time. But generally I was walking kind of around a month in the end at a time. But because of lockdown, I was just raring to go. I wanted to finish the project and I was really worried there'd be a second lockdown. In fact, it started to happen. I mean, when I finished the project, I was kind of going to have a party, but we were down to the rule of 6, all these different rules we've had. I think it was the rule of 6 then. So theoretically it was small groups of 6 that kind of welcomed me at the end. So it was, But if I'd got it wrong by a week, it would have been a problem because we were then into a proper lockdown again.
Yeah. So all this is done. And the next question is what's next? I mean, you're going to spend a year editing, and I think that's really interesting that now you've got the time to digest all this and go back and give it unity, because part of what you're doing in editing is you're applying your look to your photos, right?
That's right. I mean, I think the first stage is I just want to do right to each day by spending time to make the edit. But often on the blog, I'll be posting things that might be a bit funny or things that are historically interesting. And in amongst that, there might be the occasional picture, which is a good fine art picture. Projects changed for me a bit from when I began. At the beginning, I felt that the only things I wanted to post would be kind of fine art type considered pictures. But then I was seeing so many things that were interesting historically or culturally, or just things that were just plain funny, that I wanted to sort of cast the net a bit wider and include a broader set of pictures. And because I felt it was almost like an archive that I was creating, I wanted to include those kind of pictures as well. And I still do for the 156 days I've left to edit.
I'm noticing, I'm just looking at some of the earlier photos like Kent and places like that. And in some of them, you're showing, here's one, pictures of a museum in Margate. In Dover, you've got, I don't know what looks like, maybe it's a ferry car park or a lorry park or something like that. You really kept yourself to the edge, right? So if there was something really interesting to see that was a mile inland, you didn't go there?
If it was a mile inland and it was really interesting, then yes, I did. But on the south coast, there's so many. I mean, there's so many incredible sites down there that I did keep really close to it. But in Scotland, I often went to the sort of some of the Neolithic sites or the tombs or these really interesting ancient sites. So like in Kilmartin, there's all these cup and ring markings, and I found that really fascinating, of this sort of mysterious culture. No one really knows what these cups and rings were for, and the kind of the Gallic kings there, that was the center, as I understand it, of the whole of the British Isles there. And then so it was that midpoint between Ireland and Scotland, and it was the people that controlled those islands controlled Britain. And then the north, it was like the hub between Scandinavia and Britain. So it's so I did later on, yes.
Were there any distilleries on the coast up in Scotland? I don't think there are there?
There's not many, but I was really, I think there's Glenmorangie is on the coast, I think. But I think it was just one of these things, because I kind of liked my whiskey, but I just, whenever I was near the distillery, it was so sometimes I was just filthy, and I just felt I wasn't really kind of in the right frame of mind to kind of go and into a shop even. So, and sometimes it was just the wrong time of day, or, I mean, every day I tended to have I had to schedule to get somewhere for the light or to buy water, or, I was on Google Maps figuring out when the one store that sold food would close, and almost every day I seemed to be rushing for something, or even something as banal as the hours that a public toilet would stay open, either to get water or to use the facilities. So I didn't really have much time at all to do any sort of sightseeing pleasure things.
That's too bad. That's too bad. So I said, what's next? And I'm looking at all these Scottish islands that you haven't visited. Would you want to do the perimeters of all the islands?
I'd love to. I think Ireland and the islands, maybe call it the constellation or something like that. I'm not sure, but but it has to work for me from a business point of view. I have to sell enough prints, and the book has to be a success so I can commit the time to do it. But if it is, I would love to do that. Okay, well, everyone listening, please go to the website and then buy some prints. I'm very proud to have a print of yours. It's not from this series. It's a print. Was it Greenland? The one that I bought. Greenland, I'll put a link in the show notes. I love it because it's this really minimalist sort of seascape and this mountain coming down into the sea, and it's almost black and white. And I thought it was a black and white photo, but you said it's actually a color photo. But it's just that the scene was so monochromatic. Kirk, you do know that's ice in the foreground.
Oh, it is. It's the sea is frozen there.
That's the Greenland ice cap. I know it really looks like the sea. Okay. That's the Greenland ice cap. There you go. Just slight ripples in it's a really strange light effect. Yeah. Okay. Well, I recommend that everyone buy a photo from Quintin, because there's the problem. I hate to say it. The problem is there are so many nice photos that how does one choose? I think the answer is you don't choose. You just buy many. Yes. That's what the answer is.
I know that we spoke on the phone a while ago, and I was asking you what you were going to do next, and you were talking about maybe doing a river someplace. You were talking about a river in France or Germany where you can only go for 3 months now because of Brexit, so that makes it hard. But I mean, how do you follow up on something like this? You're still a young man. You've got a long way to go. What do you? I'm sure you've got a short list of ideas.
Wow. I mean, I think part of it is a way of traveling rather than maybe. I don't think it needs to be a grand adventure to travel like this and still get the same creative benefits from it. So it could be a shorter journey and it could still have the same benefits. I mean, there are some more modest journeys I'm keen to do. So there's Glendower's Way across Wales. There's the South Downs Way. I mean, they're short but simple walks, or it could be a river walk following along Europe. But then, there are in the back of my mind these sort of grand ideas, like sort of the furthest points you can walk across the globe, which ironically is only twice. I think it's 22,000. I think it's Cape Town to I think it's Siberia, 22,000 kilometers. But that's only double what the perimeter journey was. So
it's only double.
Yeah, but it is surprise. So the perimeter is more than a quarter of the circumference of the globe. Yeah. So although it's a tiny island, it's so enmeshed. So kind of my mindset is that these pretty large walks are possible.
But that wouldn't be on land the whole time? The longest on land would be from the tip of South America to up in Canada or Alaska, wouldn't it?
I haven't done that much research, but I think the longest continuous land journey is the Africa one across. I think it's if you follow roads. I think we'll have to look into it. We can,
I actually saw a map of this, like it popped up on social media somewhere, and you could walk from Siberia to I think South Africa or something. It's crazy.
I think maybe it's the distortion of the globe with the Mercator projection that South America, North America looks like it would be longer, but I think maybe it is longer. Africa, because Africa is huge, isn't it? Always looks small in there.
You could just come and walk around the United States. That'd be a short little pop.
Actually, I've got to taste the American trail culture. I want to have a trail name. I want to meet trail angels, trail buddies, all of that stuff. It seems so much more social and, in a way, more fun in the States. I mean, the Pacific Coast Trail. I really love to do that. So, I mean, it's not sort of original in the way that this other journey was, but I'd love to experience that. Yeah.
Okay, Quintin, thanks for joining us again. We look forward to hearing what's next. Let us know when the book comes out so we can mention it.
Thanks, Kirk.
And so links in the show notes to this crazy story and hundreds of photos, and buy a photo. It's worth it. I hope we can talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Kirk. That's brilliant.
Okay, time for our snapshots. Jeff, what have you got?
Well, I'm going to talk about something new to my house, which is the HomePod Mini.
But that has nothing to do with photography.
It does, because I get to listen to music while I'm working on photography. How about that?
There you go. That's a good link.
I have had a regular HomePod in our living room for a while. It replaced an old Sonos speaker, which was a great speaker, but I just didn't really like the Sonos software and didn't really want to spend a whole lot of money to get more Sonos things. And since I'm an Apple household anyway, I figured I would go with Apple's offering, and it's been great. And so when Apple introduced the HomePod Mini, I thought that would be a nice, inexpensive way to expand the capabilities, both with Siri and both just having some music around the house. So I have one in the kitchen and I have one in my office upstairs. And even though the audio is not as good as the full-size HomePod, for my needs, it is perfectly more than adequate. I guess that's not a real ringing endorsement, but it sounds good. It fills the room, and it gives me that ability to play music in multiple rooms through the house, which has been really nice. So they're $100 each. They seem to be really well made. I'm very happy with them. Kirk, what do you have this week?
Well, I too have a new Apple product. It's the new MacBook Air, the M1 MacBook Air. So this is the one with Apple's new chips. Before we started recording this episode, we were talking with Quintin for about a half an hour about the Macs and iPhones and all that, because he's an Apple user as well. I bought the absolute cheapest MacBook Air. $999, 8 gigs of RAM, thinking if these are as fast as Apple says, then I don't need to spend more for extra RAM. I don't need to buy the MacBook Pro because it's the same processor. My needs for a laptop are limited. It's my second computer for testing, for doing screenshots and screencasts, and it's my emergency computer if my iMac dies. I'm incredibly impressed. This is fast. The battery life is extraordinary. It's for the first time I've bought the cheapest Mac, and it's better than any previous Mac that I've had. Obviously, it's a similar laptop. I mean, my main computer is an iMac, and I'm waiting for them to update the iMac with their own chip. Mm-hmm. But if you're considering getting a new Mac, I would think twice about spending the extra $200 or £200 for that additional RAM. You'll need it if you're going to be opening big files like videos, but otherwise, I mean, just for one example, I opened 78 tabs in Safari and I was able to work very smoothly. I opened 24 apps at the same time and it had no problem. And this is something that, previous Macs didn't do. So if you need the features in the MacBook Pro, like the Touch Bar, and maybe you want extra RAM and extra storage, go for it. But if you just want the cheapest Mac out there and something that, to me, this is going to last many years, it's so fast and the battery life is so good, $999 can't go wrong.
And it's so loud, I hear, because it's of that massive fan that's inside, right?
There's no fan in the MacBook Air, yeah. So I know people particularly, we're talking on Skype now. On my iMac, my fan's not running. I don't know, is your Mac's fan running now?
Not currently, but it...
Okay.
Often does.
Often video conferencing makes the fan go crazy. And these new processors are very low power, so they don't heat a lot. And the MacBook Air doesn't even have a fan. It'll slow down if it gets too hot. But other than that, it's incredibly quiet. So very pleased with this new MacBook Air.
Wonderful.
Thanks for listening to Photoactive. You can find show notes, including any photos we discuss in this episode, at photoactive.co. That's photoactive.co. We couldn't afford the M. You can join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/photoactivecast. That's photoactivecast in one word. You can subscribe to Photoactive in your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts. See the links on our website. And think about leaving us a rating or review in iTunes or in your podcast app.